engine 540.
540, go ahead.
Yeah, it looks like it's going to be the car crusher again.
Welcome to the CAFMA Connect. I'm your host, Fire Chief Scott Freitag, and if you couldn't figure out from the opening, we are going to talk about the U-Picket fire today. So my guest is none other than EMS Chief Doug Niemynski.
And we're not talking about EMS today.
I know, this is different, Doug. We have you on, and as a matter of fact, when I called you, I started with, I'm not asking you to do another podcast about EMS. This is about the U-Picket fire, and one of the reasons I want to do this is there were a lot of questions from the community that came up. Some of our folks weren't on the fire, so this is an opportunity for you and I just to talk about some of the challenges that you faced throughout the incident that actually went for 3 days, not for like a couple of hours.
No.
It was long and drawn out. And I just want to make sure everyone understands what we're doing. Now, we're not doing the after-action review. This is not me and you doing an AAR because I wasn't there. It's your call. You're going to do that with the crews. But there were some unique challenges as well as some unique opportunities that you took advantage of as the IC. And so I kind of want to walk through what that was and what that looked like and what led you to make those decisions to reach out to Carl to get the drones and those types of things.
Sure.
So not EMS. We're not even bringing up the 3-letter word.
So yeah, it was, typical Thursday afternoon, and then the tones came out, thinking it was a wildland fire. Obviously, we've been in a lot of red flag conditions lately, and
sure.
So we're thinking it was going to be something like that. We've had a couple fires at U-Picket in the past, but it's never been in this same spot. This is new to us as far as this pile of cars that caught on fire this time.
It's usually Natalie, the car crusher.
Yeah, there's a big car crusher out there. It has a name called Natalie. It's written on it. We know her well.
Yes.
I've actually been to a couple of the fires over there. And usually it's debris piles related to processing the vehicle. So like when Natalie crushes up a car, it sorts it into different parts. Some of it's metal, some of it's foam, some of it's, garbage or whatever.
Right.
And usually the fires will start due to like sparking or whatever into some of those other piles. And they're a smaller pile, and we usually get it out within, an hour or two.
Right.
This thing was entirely like a different beast. So,
well, and we don't have the security video to show, but our investigators are still looking into the incident. But there is security video that shows the camera shake, and then when the camera shakes, black smoke immediately starts coming off the pile, and it's a 30-second video, and what you see is it starts coming up, and then it gets to be very heavy black smoke as the video continues, just for those 30 seconds. Our investigators have talked to folks who were on the scene, who were there, and they said, we heard a boom, saw the black smoke. One of the workers there said, well, I ran towards the fire with a hose. The other worker said, well, I turned the water on for the guy running with the hose. So we don't have a cause yet. It's still under investigation. But what we do know from the initial reports is there was some sort of boom that came from the pile, and then there was thick black smoke, and it spread quickly from there. And
I was just going to say, this picture, I took it, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes after I got there. So fairly quickly into the assignment, and you can already see how much fire and heat and the black smoke.
Well, for perspective, you were coming from Station 53.
Yeah, so maybe a mile and a half, 2 miles probably from there. We got there really fast, and I was right behind Engine 540 and 53. We all got there pretty much at the same time. So yeah, the thing got going very hot, very fast. And when you see that dark black smoke and that kind of volume, it's creating some BTUs, which is just energy,
Right.
It's going to take a lot of water to put something like that out.
Well, and with this, there is an opportunity to use foam as well, which you tried.
We used almost all the foam that we had in the warehouse. It's gone.
Right.
So, luckily, yesterday a shipment came in because we were like scrambling for another pallet of foam.
And by the way, foam is not cheap.
No. It's probably, I don't know what it costs anymore, but it used to be $100 a pail. And we probably went through close to 40 pails.
Yeah.
So
you dumped a lot of foam on the fire.
Yeah.
It was just a deep-seated fire from where it started, so it wasn't something that was on the surface. And you can see from this picture how hot that thing is burning, and then just the materials that are in it. And this is earlier in the fire because as you pulled up, you can see a couple of engines, or one engine's a little bit close, but it wasn't when they first got there. And I spoke with Captain Polikin on Friday when I stopped by the site, and he was on engine 540 driving that day, and he said they were just pulling their gear off because it was about 5 o'clock, pulling their gear off the engine, and they looked out the front garage door and saw the plume of black smoke. And they immediately thought, oh, Natalie's on fire again, which is what you hear Captain Levichek say in the dispatch audios. He's calling it in to dispatch. But it came out as a wildland fire, clearly.
Hey, Jonah, do you have the other photo from the sky we could show with the green machine? That's Natalie, and we'd be able to point that out to folks so they can understand what we're talking about. We keep saying Natalie. She's kind of behind here in the smoke. Behind the smoke.
But so this was a challenging fire from the start.
Very, because it started out, grew very quickly. We had the two engines on scene using a lot of water from the east hydrant, which is over here off Valley Road, and had the next in engines in the truck coming off the west hydrant, which is a longer hose lay.
Right.
Gave us an opportunity to do relay pumping, which a lot of our guys don't get to do very often.
Right.
Which means we have a pump that's at the hydrant, and then we had another pumper in the middle of the hose lay, and then it pumped water to our truck company, which was stationed over here, and was able to put an elevated master stream into play. And that actually cooled the fire at least as well as we could get it on the perimeter. It couldn't get penetration into the deep-seated part of the fire just due to the way the configuration of all that metal.
Right.
It was almost shielding, some of that water from getting down deep, and the foam we were adding to every apparatus.
Right.
Putting foam on it.
And that's something I don't think a lot of people understand, is that when you're dealing with a pile of scrap in a junkyard, that these fires that start in these piles are deep-seated, and they're in areas that water simply won't penetrate.
Nope.
And the first thing someone will say is, well, just get the heavy equipment in there and pull it apart, and then you can get to it.
It sounds logical, doesn't it? But that pile is probably over 30 feet high, and at one point during the operation, it started wobbling, and we had to move our guys away from it just because we thought somebody's going to get crushed.
Right.
So, safety being our number one priority, we're not going to hurt anybody for a garbage pile. It's not going to happen.
Right.
It shouldn't happen.
And we do understand citizens were concerned because of the air quality.
Absolutely.
And, if you thought it was bad at your house, you should have been on the ground around the pile as it was burning. And then the wind kept shifting. Tell me about that.
So, predominantly, we have the southwest wind direction here in Prescott Valley. However, as soon as the sun went down, we started getting some crazy wind shifts, and all of a sudden we'd get a north wind, and that whole column would shift and come right over where everybody was working. It did that numerous times throughout the night. Even had an east wind at one point, which is very rare. We must have had a front either passing through to the north of us or something, but it did affect the smoke column. And by morning, when the sun came out, the valley between Prescott Valley all the way to Chino, Dewey, Humboldt, you could just see a light haze in the air, and it was probably just resting, almost like a small inversion. But once the sun comes back up, that stuff lifts off. And
well, one of the challenges for us is you have firefighters working on the scene, and if they're in a cold zone, so to speak, they don't have their masks on for the SCBAs because they can work safely without it.
So me, I was in this zone here, so I'm on the west side. These are all the cars that people would pick their parts from, and this was considered an exposure for us. So we were trying to protect these vehicles here from burning up if the heat were to come to the west. That piece of equipment there, that crusher, did receive some heat and damage. Natalie's right over here. You can't really see her through the smoke, but that's Natalie right there. And that actually says Natalie on that sign. That's like multi-million-dollar piece of equipment.
Right.
We did not want that thing to burn.
Well, and there were a couple of fuel tanks back there as well.
They're right here. In fact, that's a camera right there. So those fuel tanks, we concentrated a couple of host streams. We had a 2.5 and also a portable deluge, which is a master stream. And we were trying to keep that fire away from going to the north, because if it would have burned Natalie or those fuel tanks, we would have had a real big problem real fast.
Well, and the crews did a great job keeping it out. You could see it in one of the aerial shots. Actually, in this one, just to the right of the screen, that's all foam. Foam
rubber and, combustible stuff. So they did keep it out of that. Our goal was really just to keep this fire in the origin, which was the pile. So it was like, guys, just keep it in the pile and let's just be safe, not get anybody hurt over this thing, and protect our exposures. And so that's what we did.
So going back just for a second to the smoke and it blowing around, we know there's risk on fire scenes. Mm-hmm. We get that. We also know that firefighters are more likely to be diagnosed with some sort of cancer than the regular public. Here's one of the reasons why.
Absolutely.
And as much as we try to protect our people, when wind shifts erratically, because you can't work the entire incident in an SCBA in the cold zone. So our folks were exposed to some of that smoke, and to that end, everyone is filling out an exposure form so that we can track, but we're also making sure that all the reports talk about the wind shifts. We had this set up over here. This was the cold zone. Mm-hmm. We had an unexpected wind shift, and now the cold zone was the warm zone.
Yeah.
And so we did everything we could, or you did as the IC, and the crews did on the ground to make sure they had their SCBAs on. But
those guys worked so hard. They went through so many air bottles, and we had our utility set up over here to the south, kind of near Valley Road, and went through a whole utility worth of air. Had to go get it refilled here at 53 just so we could provide more breathing air. So that was something new to me on a fire. I've never had logistics really come up where we had to fuel engines on the scene.
So talk about that for a second.
So our engine, we had 4 engines pumping a lot of water. We figure probably close to 3,000 gallons a minute for probably over 7 hours straight. And they started to run out of diesel fuel. And so, I get a call on the radio, hey, I've got a quarter tank of fuel. I'm like, okay, I'm working on it. And so had someone run over to Carta, and we have a fuel truck, a small tank on the back of a pickup truck. I'm not even sure how many gallons it holds. It's maybe 100 gallons. And Gordon Dibble would take that thing to the gas station, fill it up, run over here, find the engine that had the least amount of fuel, fill that up, and then run back to Circle K and do it again and again. So much that we got a fraud alert on our credit card and they shut it off. So then we're using someone else's card. It's like, that was interesting. And then the DEF fluid that all of our newer apparatus require to run, we started running out of DEF. So then I had to call somebody from the warehouse, wake him up at 11:30 at night and say, hey, I need you to come in and hook up a trailer, get the 55-gallon drum of DEF fluid, which diesel exhaust fluid. It's like a uric acid.
Okay.
So he went to the warehouse, hooked that up, brought it over, and we were able to refill our engine's DEF fluid. Apparently, if you run those things out of DEF fluid, it'll put the truck into a limp mode, and it's just not going to drive back to the station very well in limp mode.
No, and I think once it goes into limp mode, even when you put the DEF in it takes half an hour, 45 minutes to reset the system. So on an incident like this, you can't have the engine just run out of DEF fluid, nor can you really have it run out of fuel. I was talking to Chief Fatima on Friday morning, and he said, I can't remember who was pumping engine 54, but as John walked by, the engineer said, hey, Chief, I knew there was a low fuel light on these engines, but I've never seen it before.
That's a good point. I've never seen it either.
And John's message was, we're trying.
Yeah.
We are working. And since then, I've learned through the county sheriff that they have a 100-gallon diesel trailer. So if when we have another extended event in the future, we know we can reach out through emergency management or the sheriff's office and have their trailer along with our truck And then multiple different fuel cards so we don't get the fraud alert.
Well, we actually got that specific diesel fuel card up to like unlimited for that reason. We just have to notify, hey, we're going to use it a lot, and then it's not going to be a problem anymore.
Yes,
so that was a lesson learned.
Yeah, so you weren't stealing. Now, at one point, talk about this greenish blue flame.
Yeah, this is, I think, at 4 o'clock in the morning or something like that. We look out, and you just see this bluish flame. Obviously, what's burning is everything, every car part it's involved. I'm thinking, copper creates a greenish blue flame, so could be copper tubing of some kind. Lots of different chemical reactions. We were getting, and I didn't get it on film, but we were getting a lot of magnesium and aluminum fires, Class D metal fire, which you can't use water. It was ineffective because it just basically breaks down water into hydrogen and oxygen, creates a little bit of an explosion. So every now and again, we would see just giant white sparks shoot out from the pile, and we knew, there goes an aluminum block or some wheels or something.
Well, and talk about some of those explosions you had, because airbags and parts that would explode and fly up out of the pile and then land in the area of our crews.
There were a lot of explosions, various, intensities, I would say, some of which were airbags. The airbags were kind of short in duration, pretty loud, and I probably saw 5 or 6 that actually inflated the airbag, which flew into the air, and then it would catch on fire and kind of just fall. So that's how we knew they were airbags, just seeing those things floating around. A lot of things that exploded, we couldn't tell where it was coming from. It was deep in the pile, very loud. Some of them were real deep and kind of scary. A couple times I remember calling for a par check, which, because I can't see through the smoke. I can't see my guys on the other side of the pile. And you hear this loud explosion, you're like, oh my God, is everybody okay?
So explain par check for people.
Personal accountability report. We're trying to say, all right, guys, something's concerning to me. I want a par check. So I announce on the radio, hey, give me a par check. And every engine company on the scene will say, okay, engine 53, I have a positive par of 3. We're on the northeast corner fire attack. So they just explain to me where they are, what they're doing, and their total number of people, so that we know everybody's accounted for. And so
perfect.
We keep that. On fires, we try to do it every 10 minutes, and on outdoor fires, you can kind of pare it down to a reasonable level. But with the explosions and things like that, we did quite a few.
So on this one, Doug, you decided to deploy some new technology. Tell me about that.
So Russ Smith was initially at the Engineers Academy, which is at CARTA, which CARTA is our training facility. It's only not even a mile from where this occurred. Well, Russ launched his drone from CARTA and actually flew right over to the fire and took some initial video of when the fire happened. He then showed up at scene and knocked on my window and was like, hey, I still got a little bit of battery left. I'm like, yeah, I'd love to use it. So his drone is not the department's drone. It's a personal drone that he owns. It doesn't have the FLIR, so we couldn't see heat with it. FLIR. I don't know what FLIR actually stands for. But
it's infrared.
Anyway, it's a heat signature, so FLIR sees the heat. Carl, I called at home. I think he was on days off. I'm like, hey, man, can you come over to this fire and bring the drone? He's like, yeah, I'll be there in 20 minutes. So he did. He shows up, a bunch of drone batteries and a nice drone. I think we have that one right now.
We have 2.
Do we have 2?
Yeah, we have 2 smaller drones.
So here's the FLIR. So this is what the FLIR footage looks like with the drone. So we were able to basically station the drone over the fire, and you could see where the hot spots are based on the heat signatures. And we were able to talk to the guys manning the hose streams and say, okay, you need to go a little bit more to the right or left or 10 degrees. And we were talking them into the heat spots, and they were able to concentrate their hose streams right on the heat signatures, which they can't see through the smoke. Right. They cannot tell where that's going. So we were talking them in there. It's the first time I've actually got to use the drone in any situation to fight fire, and I thought it was a really valuable tool.
Well, and something Chief Fedema talked about was there was concern for the fuel tanks that are down here on the left of the screen.
That's them.
But you couldn't get anyone around the side to get a good visual.
Mm-hmm.
So using the drone, you were able to get a good visual, determine that there was separation between the pile and the fuel tanks. So you just focused on the hot spots. But one of the things I'd like to point out to folks in this heat signature video is you see two streams at one point on a hot spot on the front toward the front of the fire. You see it cool down. They move to another hot spot, and that flares back up again.
That's kind of what led me down the path of, guess what, guys, we're not putting this fire out. We're merely containing it or controlling it a little bit, but it's going to burn. We're not getting water deep down into the seat of the fire. And so we probably had flowed close to 1.5 million, 2 million gallons of water at that point, which were going down into a containment pond. And I didn't want to overflow that. So I don't want to waste all of the town of Prescott Valley's water not putting a fire out. I mean, it'd be one thing if it was effective in putting it out, but it wasn't. So we kind of changed our strategy to more of a, perimeter protection and let this thing burn the heat out of the middle until we can get some equipment in there, because they have all the nice equipment to move vehicles. We just couldn't put anybody in that dangerous situation.
No, and I think some in the public would say, well, you should have just started breaking the pile apart to begin with. Well, the fire at that point was too hot, moving too quickly, and it would have significantly or created a significant danger for the people operating that equipment. One, they don't use SCBAs.
Nope.
So they're not trained in that. Two, we're not trained to use their equipment. But you would have damaged the equipment. You could have hurt people because of the heat coming off the fire. So the best we could do is what you did, which is, hey, we need to stop wasting the town of Prescott Valley's water. Let's contain it to the area of origin. And we're going to have to, in some ways, just wait it out.
So basically, this started Thursday night. It burned really hot all night long. Friday, all day, it was just consuming hot spots. And then by Saturday morning, we were able to get the guys and their equipment in there. And this is kind of a shot of what that looked like. So the U-Picket personnel are manning the excavators, and they were able to start picking this pile apart a little at a time. And the guys up in truck 50 are cooling the hot spots as they expose them. And it took them till about 3 p.m. or so on Saturday before they cooled everything off. And so this is just kind of doing its thing. I'm sure this is a Friday picture because there's still quite a bit of heat left in it.
Right. I know I went on Friday and hung out with the crew for a little bit. They actually let me get up in the bucket and play some. Control the hose stream and control the bucket, which I haven't been up in a bucket in probably 15 years. So it was kind of cool to get back in there and work with those guys, but to get up above it and see what you had been dealing with. Because I would hit a hot spot that popped up with the deck or with the deluge gun off the ladder, and I would soak that thing down and hit every crevice I could hit, and then I'd move to another hot spot, and this one would pop back up again. So it's not as simple as some would think to just go in and, hey, put the fire out and contain the smoke because you're bothering me with it. And it's not that easy.
I wish we could have just put it out. We definitely tried. It was a stubborn fire. I learned a lot of lessons equipment-wise. A lot of our guys got to do relay pumping. They don't get to do that often. The truck company operations, we got to shift through 3 different shifts of guys learning how to do the stick. And they did a great job with that thing. And the other cool thing with the air supply on that truck company, it's a giant bottle of air, and you can hook your mask up, so you're not just on that little bottle.
Right. So
they were able to sit up there and actually breathe air and operate that stick for hours, and it was a tremendous, valuable piece of equipment. At one point, they did call out emergency traffic because Nick, as a captain at 50, he saw the whole pile starting to rock, and he thought it was going to collapse and hurt somebody.
Right.
And that was like, all right, time out, guys. Let's reevaluate the situation. Don't be anywhere close to this thing where you could get crushed by a car. It's just not worth it.
Well, and they had to move, at one point you had to move some engines back because first arriving engines placed where they should.
So engine 540 was the first in engine. 540 was that one on the east gate that was closer to the pile. And when that pile the fire advanced closer to it, it got hot. And then we did have to move 540 back to the fence line,
Right.
where it is in that other picture that we were just looking at. And from that distance, it was safe. But
Well, and we had somebody call yesterday who was concerned for whatever reason. This individual thought that we didn't respond to the fire and that we just let it burn. And had we responded immediately and used water and foam, we could have put the fire out. Well, clearly from the video and pictures that we have and the fact that we responded from less than a mile away and it was Engine 540 who noticed the fire first, we had resources there rather quickly. We used every bit of foam that we had, and it was ineffective.
almost every bit of water the town had.
Yeah, and we used over 1 million gallons of water. I don't think I could have asked you guys to do anything else with this fire. I think that from my perspective, looking at it, you did what you could do to control this and then recognized, hey, we need to start conserving the water because it's not effective. We can contain it here, let it burn until it cools, and then we can pull it apart, hit the hot spots, and we'll be more effective that way.
I believe, I don't know if it was last year or the year before, down in Phoenix, there was a similar fire at a dump down there, salvage yard fire, and it went for days as well, and they had hundreds of firefighters on it.
Right.
So we did have constant staffing on this fire from the time it started until the time we left on Saturday about 3 p.m., and then we kept going back after that just to check on it to make sure nothing was going to happen, like a rekindle or anything.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, we took it very seriously. We did everything we could. I do have some ideas, and I'll talk to Fire Marshal Rick Chase about, future plans. Like, what can we do to help maybe stop this from happening again?
Right.
And so, yeah, I wrote down a lot of things, and we'll go through those together and then meet with the business and outline those plans and see if we can accommodate any of that.
Well, and I think your after action is going to be important so that, and having these videos and pictures are critical to the AAR because as you're meeting with crews and talking about what happened, what did they see, you can break down, well, we made this decision for this reason, or we made this decision based on what I could see here, but I didn't see that. And so it's really going to be a good learning tool for all of us. And then talking from the safety aspect of things, Captain Fournier seeing the pile shift and calling that out, recognizing the smoke kept moving. And this is where people say a picture is worth 1,000 words. But let me just say, Doug, that sometimes those words aren't accurate because the picture captures one moment, doesn't tell the whole story. And I'll just tell them myself, there were some pictures that were posted from somebody that was there that took them. I'm not thinking a wind shift. I'm just thinking, okay, the smoke plume's going this way. And I see one picture of the ladder company up. I see someone in the bucket. They have an air tank on. The smoke is blowing away from them. I'm like, good job. Next picture, about the same time frame, I see an engine in the smoke with someone on top of it without an SCBA. Now, did I jump to a conclusion in my head? I did. And then the next morning, Friday morning, I called Chief Fedema for an update. And I said, hey, when we look at this, I wanted to talk to you about a couple pictures I saw. One was this and one was this. And so he explained to me, hey, the smoke kept shifting around. So someone who was in the cold zone suddenly enveloped in a warm zone, and they rushed to put their tank on. And then when I mentioned it to you, as I wasn't saying, hey, Doug, here's a problem, I'm like, yeah, this, John explained this to me, weird, make sure we fill out all of these exposure forms. You did say, hey, yeah, I did see somebody on top of an engine, and I called him out over the air and said, get your tank on. So all of the concerns based on those pictures were unwarranted because all of that was being considered at the time. The tricky thing is when you put those out on social media and other places, people who aren't close to the situation start jumping to conclusions and judging. I'm fortunate enough that it was our agency, so when I posed the question to the operations chief, he was able to explain it to me. So folks out there in social media land, when you're looking at the pictures and videos from this fire, understand there's more to the story than that moment that's caught.
That's a good way to put it. It was a moment in time.
Right.
And there's some context both sides of that picture, that occur. So, yeah.
So I'll just point out, I did not tell John, hey, we have a serious problem. I just said,
Looks
I have
bad.
I have a couple questions about this because I saw this. Can you explain it to me?
Mm-hmm.
And he did. And I'm like, hey, that makes total sense. Yeah, absolutely. I get it. Understanding that, let's make sure everyone has an exposure report, because I've heard a story, I think it was out of Phoenix. They all responded to a chemical plant or some sort of plant fire. And years later, every person that was on that fire ended up with some sort of cancer.
Really?
And that was before the cancer presumptive, but every one of them could tie themselves to being exposed to something on that fire. So I want to make sure that 5, 10, 15 years from now, somebody that was on that fire that was exposed to these carcinogens that are clearly in the air in that smoke, that we protect them by having that documentation in hand to say, here is the exposure, here's the report explaining why they were exposed, and then there's far fewer questions from workers' compensation at that point.
I actually filled out that report for the exposure, and I put all the guys in there that I could remember seeing on the fire. And I think I even put the drone pictures with the column and whatnot, just to give some context to that for future people that maybe, they don't remember that fire. It's a long time ago or something like that.
Right.
So.
Well, the more documentation we can have to protect our people, the better off we are, because we know bad things can happen with this type of smoke, and we want to make sure our folks are protected. But for the community out there, we did everything we could. We don't control the wind, so we don't control where the smoke goes, because we do get those phone calls. We get those phone calls when there's a fire in the forest and people are upset because the smoke is coming into the community. And I understand the frustration.
Nobody wants to breathe it. But the best you can do is close your windows and turn your AC, filter the air best you can.
Well, I can tell you, in our office, the back door between Chief Tharp and I doesn't seal all that well. So we came out of a meeting in the multi-purpose room, walked back into my office, and it was just, you could smell the smoke. And then when I got in my staff vehicle to leave, I turned the air on, and smoke had gotten into all the systems in the car. So for a week, every time I turned the air on, there was just smoke blowing out from that fire. So we understand, but we don't control the smoke.
Not a whole lot we can do about it.
No. But, Doug, I appreciate you coming on and talking about the U-Picket fire with me. Any lessons learned that you would like to share? I mean, you shared a few. Anything else you'd like to close with?
Nothing off the top of my head. I think the guys worked their butts off.
They absolutely did.
Guys and gals, they did a great job. The supporting agencies did too. I know I had an ambo parked out there from Lifeline actually all night long.
Right.
They were there for us in case we had anybody get hurt. Luckily, nobody did require any kind of treatment or transport. And then there was
thank you to that crew.
PVPD as well, closing off the road. And their volunteers, they did a great job.
We had Prescott Fire out.
Prescott Fire with Engine 75 pumping that hydrant for us. Did a really good job. They were one of the ones we had to refuel to during that process. So I think everybody, worked their butts off, and I just wanted to say thanks for that.
Yeah. And from my perspective, looking at this, looking at the fire, talking to you now, I really appreciate everything that you did, because I don't see a lot in there that I would change. I think that you put the streams where they needed to be. You got the technology in that you needed. You got the fuel in that you needed, the DEF fluid. I mean, this was a challenging event, something like we haven't had before. So you get to be the first to deal with it.
Hopefully the last, but we'll see.
Yeah. Well, and I apologize, because I was on vacation that day, welding in the shop, and my wife sent me a text and said, hey, I just left. There's a big column of black smoke. And I stopped welding. I went over, I picked up my phone. I looked at the work phone. I'm like, I don't know. They said it was a wildland fire. And I went back to what I was doing. And it wasn't until sometime later that I actually walked outside and looked and was like, oh, crap.
Yeah.
Wonder what they're doing. And then, as you said, we've been over for scrap pile fires there multiple times over the years. So when I called dispatch and they said, oh, we're dealing with a scrap pile fire, I thought, well, Well, they got it. And then when I was leaving Friday morning to go meet with Senator Sinema and some other folks for a briefing, I looked in that direction and thought, oh, crap.
Yeah,
it's still burning.
Yeah.
So that's when I called Chief Fetterman and asked for an update and found out a lot more background than I had before. And just sounds like you guys did a great job. I really appreciate the effort.
I appreciate it too. Thanks for coming out and playing with the truck and seeing what we were dealing with, and, supporting us. It's been...
Yeah. Firefighter Pena, thank you for allowing me to run the controls on the truck. I've heard from Engineer Runo that there was something broken, and it was clearly my fault. I doubt it. I think Runo's just giving me a hard time because he's a Ford fan, and I'm always there to tow him when he needs it. Just something. Right there. We'll leave it there.
Yeah.
For the community, I hope this is helpful for those that watch or listen. I think this is a good thing when we can talk about a fire like this and provide more information to the community so they can see what we do and the challenges that we had. It's just an educational opportunity. So thank you.
There's some other, I think, drone shots and videos that are probably on our Facebook page that Carl took.
Right.
Not just what we have on this podcast. So there's a lot more available.
Oh, yeah. A lot more available. And I did ask Carl to put together a presentation for the board for May to talk about the drone program, because this is why we have it. This is why we have a drone program. But I know that our drones, we bought some pretty inexpensive drones that are limited in capabilities. So I asked Carl, what do you need? He told me, now we want to present to the board. Here's why we want to go out for grants or other ways to fund buying the better drones. And we're not really looking at that much in the scheme of things. About $7,500 to $10,000 per drone would give us what we need. That's 50% less than what they were on the market for originally. So about $20,000, we can replace both of our small drones and have drones that are more effective and we can use in more situations to provide that assistance. I mean, trail rescues.
I actually had a call a couple years ago with a lady, dementia patient that wandered off, and we were looking for her all night long. It got really, really cold, and we couldn't find her. I tried to get a DPS helicopter, has a big FLIR. They think, I think it's out of Kingman or something, but it was unavailable. So they were like, no, sorry, can't bring it here. We'll give you the other ship. Well, it didn't have FLIR. So they flew around looking with their spotlight, which was helpful.
Right.
But we couldn't see heat. And so we didn't have a drone back then. Here that lady was probably within a quarter mile of where we were searching, kind of like tucked up against a building in Stone Ridge.
Right.
We would have seen her with a drone with the FLIR that could see the person's heat signature. But we didn't have that back then. And so like I'm excited to get something that can do that. And that footage that we have from the fire, that drone, even though it can see heat, apparently it doesn't see human heat signatures because it's not like dialed in that low. So
well, and that's why we want to talk about if we can get $20,000 worth of funding, we can improve the drone program, have the better drones, and then we do go out quite often helping search for people. Or I know one of the first things this drone did was found a body for PVPD that they were looking for. So there's numerous ways we can use these drones: wildland fires, structure fires, scrapyard fires, search and rescue.
Swiftwater, you can search downstream.
Right.
Yeah.
So vitally important. They can be deployed quickly. I think we have a good program and a plan. We just need to upgrade some of the equipment that we have. So we'll be talking to the board about that and how we might be able to fund that in the future.
All right. I'm going to just call you out. Carl, you're next. You can explain it here on the podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? I was thinking of that as we looked at this. We're going to have Carl on the podcast and he can talk about the drone and drone program and what it does. And maybe that'll help. Somebody out there might see this and say, I can help you get those drones.
Well, think of it too in terms of recruitment. Like this can be you know, if you like operating drones and stuff, that could be a career for you in the fire service. You know, it's just a new way to recruit.
Yeah. No. And actually, Carl is in the new recruitment video, and he is flying the drone.
Cool.
So we're looking at innovation and technology to sell the fire service. It's sexy, Doug.
Yeah. Well, they're good at video games, so you know.
Yeah, we're trying to sell sexy. This is a sexy profession. All right. Doug, thank you again for coming on. Greatly appreciate it. Jonah, thank you for all the technological advancements that you've done here for us to make this what it is, especially on this podcast. For all of you out there, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. And until next time, please understand, we don't control the direction of smoke.